With technology, accessibility is more important than ever. Asustor understands this. So with the Drivestor 2 or the AS1102T NAS, your data is more accessible than ever, and it's accessible to those who may not be familiar with network-attached storage. I'm James Hertz from MUO, and we're going to talk about the Drivestor 2 and whether it's the best beginner NAS for your home and personal use. So let's talk about the design of the Drivestor 2. This 2-bay NAS unit measures out at 165 by 102 by 218 millimeters, and it weighs approximately 2.5 pounds. In terms of its design, it's a little different than the standard matte black finish you'll see on many electronics. There is a faceted design, and the Asustor logo is in rose gold. Now, if you are looking at the front of the unit, there are 4 clear LED indicator lights, keeping you abreast of the power, the system status, the network, and the hard drive. There is also at the front and rear of the unit a USB 3.2 port, so you can access your external devices rather easily. Now, also in talking about the back of the unit, there is your standard power and reset buttons, as well as a very quiet fan to keep your NAS unit cooled. But what is most interesting is the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port at the back. So let's talk about why that 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port is so enticing. First off, when you have a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, it gives you 2.5 times the potential speed that normal gigabit Ethernet has. So you can jump from 100 megabytes per second to potentially 250 megabytes per second. Now, again, why is there value in this for the specific NAS? Now, if you look at Asustor's rivals like QNAP, TerraMaster, or Synology, you're not going to have that 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port for the same cost, or it's not going to be there at all, or you're going to have to deal with something like link aggregation of 2 single gigabit Ethernet ports. Instead, Asustor offers all the convenience without any extra work on your end, and this is why there's such great value in it. Now, in terms of other technical specifications for the Drivestor 2, what should you keep in mind? First off, it has a Realtek 1.4 gigahertz quad-core processor and has 1 gigabyte of DDR4 RAM. With media mode enabled, 512 megabytes of that RAM is dedicated to multimedia tasks. Now, in terms of other entertainment things, it can be used to transcode, stream, and play back 4K multimedia. So with the Drivestor 2, there's a lot of potential power in the hardware and the speed of the device, but now you need to look at the drives for it. So with the Drivestor 2, it supports 2 3.5-inch SATA 3 hard drives, but not any hard drives will do. This is where you need NAS-grade drives that can handle the workload. Now, in the past, I've experienced data loss, and I know how detrimental that can be. Since then, I've used Seagate's Backup Plus hard drive, and I've had it with me for several years, keeping my data storage safe. So when looking at drives that are suitable for a NAS environment, I immediately went to Seagate's Ironwolf series. And here's a few reasons why you should consider it for integration with the Drivestor 2. So let's talk about why you would consider Seagate's Ironwolf series for your Drivestor 2. First off, if you look at the warranty, there's some overlap. In terms of the Drivestor 2, there is a 3-year warranty, and with the base Ironwolf series, there is a 3-year warranty, and up to a 5-year warranty if you're looking at the Ironwolf Pro series. Now, also, you need to keep in mind how much these drives are going to be working. These hard drives are made to be run 24/7, and they're also made to transfer both from the hard drive and to the hard drive a lot of data. So what you have is different degrees of durability. With the baseline Ironwolf series, it handles up to a workload rate of 180 terabytes a year, and with the Ironwolf Pro series, it handles 300 terabytes per year. So after choosing your drives, it's all about installing them. Now, with the Drivestor 2, there is one of the first glimpses at its user friendliness in terms of the toolless installation that it offers. So Both the casing as well as the hard drives inside the unit are held by thumb screws, so you don't need anything like a screwdriver to install anything. Simply remove the 2 thumb screws from the back, lift off the case, and then slide in the hard drives and secure them on both sides via the included thumb screws. In this case, it actually is a guaranteed toolless installation and holds the drives in very securely without too much stress on the installer's part. Let's move on to talking about the actual RAID options for the Drivestor 2 and your drives. Now, when you get to the volume setting screen, if you're not really familiar with what RAID is and the different types, you are given some guidance on what you can exactly select. Now, this comes in the form of basically Asustor showing whether or not there's data protection on your selection and the number of drives that are taken up in it. With the Drivestor 2, it supports either RAID 0, RAID 1, a single drive, or JBOD configuration. Now, personally, I prefer safety, so I went with a RAID 1 configuration, which mirrors my drives, so the data is written identically to both drives, so if one fails, I'm not going to lose my data. Now, this is at the cost of performance, so you do want to keep this in mind. Again, if you're not deeply familiar with the specific terminology, Asustor offers something called Asustor College. What this offers are very tiered courses for those learning to use NAS for the first time and for more advanced users as well. So if you're wanting to know more about RAID, you can definitely check out their detailed explanations as well as their definement of important terms like mirroring and striping. So let's talk about where the Drivestor 2 lands. Now, it is a home and personal use NAS, but it's also one of the best beginner NASs to learn on. So we're going to look specifically at what items support this and what exactly you can do with the Drivestor 2. Let's start talking about the user experience, starting with ADM, or Asustor Data Manager, the operating system for the NAS. Now, with ADM 4.0, there are some improvements. We'll start by talking about the visual improvements. First off, there is a dedicated dark mode, and more options are available for custom themes, as well as your login page, so you can really get everything looking the way you want. In terms of managing apps, it's much like a smartphone experience. It's very easy to just move them around the different screens, group them into folders, or use presetted sorting options. In terms of actually managing the OS, there are some things that are not exactly intuitive, but this is going to be more of a nuanced thing. Myself, I wanted to go around and actually figure it out for myself, so sometimes I would run into things like shared folders being available via access control versus something more intuitive like File Explorer. If you're using Asustor College, this may not be as much of an issue for you, because if you're learning via that step-by-step process, you're going to learn via that method, and it's going to seem more natural. To circumvent this, since I was exploring more so, I would usually use the search option. Now, with the search option, there are some things to keep in mind. Some keywords like DLNA, or if you're using something more generic like sync, won't exactly return the apps you're looking for. You're going to have to use more precise keywords. But in many cases, if you're looking for a partial keyword or something, it will bring your apps right up. You're just going to have to learn by trial and error with that. Overall, I found ADM to be a very fluid experience. There was some slowdown with apps when I did seriously overload the NAS with too many apps. But if you're disabling them or removing ones that you're not really using, you're not going to run into this issue. Overall, it's a very user-friendly OS as long as you're willing to explore a bit. So let's dive back into talking about apps. Now, on the Drivestor 2, you're going to use App Central to download and both manage your apps. Now, there are a variety of ways to browse your different apps. There's things like top apps and the latest apps, as well as Asustor-specific apps. And there's also a very useful categories option. Since the Drivestor 2 is a home and personal use NAS, you can really get started by looking at the home and personal applications that are suggested via this. Now, there are some other things to keep in mind. First off, if you are using Asustor specific apps, many of these do have a bunch of guidance at the start. You're going to get a pop-up message that's going to really help get you started. And this is very useful when you're not familiar with some of your backup options or things of that nature. Now, there are obviously third-party apps that are incredibly useful, like Plex Media Server. So if you want something like that, you should definitely check that out as well. So let's touch on the app experience a little bit. As you might expect, there's plenty of data transfer options, backup, and general use cases for NAS apps. Specifically, if you're looking at some of the home and personal use apps, Looks Good and Photo Gallery 3 are really excellent for managing your multimedia. And the only thing to really note on them is sometimes synchronization can take a little time, but afterwards they're a very fluid experience to just watch multimedia and manage your photos. Also, if you're wanting to run something like your own private media server, Plex is an excellent option. You can manage live TV and also have access to your full video catalog for streaming purposes. In terms of actual hiccups or any problems with apps, most of them were relatively minor. I would use Asustor EasySync, and sometimes it would be stuck on syncing even when the file was already complete. It just simply wouldn't update even though the file was already on the NAS or to my device, or vice versa. Similarly with ClamAV, the antivirus software, I could never get the virus definitions to update, but again, antivirus protection in this case wasn't exactly crucial to me. Overall, what you're going to find with the apps is there is a lot of use cases for it, whether you're after data storage, multimedia management, or things like virtualization. You can really explore a plethora of apps and really do what works with your skill level. So at this stage, what happens if you have questions along your NAS experience? Now, typically you may go to a third-party site. You may not find really great support with an actual company, but with Asustor College, as previously mentioned, you have those tiered courses that are going to help you skill up as you are trying different things with your NAS. Now, frequently with Asustor College, it was a really nice and succinct way to figure out a quick question instead of having to constantly go and search for an actual resolution via a third party, and there's constantly new information being added. So if you do have questions about the NAS, it's definitely something you would want to check in on. I was actually really impressed with the degree of support there, and you can obviously go to Asustor support, who responds really quickly if you have any pressing immediate questions. Now, besides the plethora of help options that are available for you and will help you along your way, there are some also outside options that make your actual integration and access of your NAS much more smooth. Asustor has made several desktop applications, and there are several mobile apps so you can access your NAS and really get whatever you need out of it without having to put too much thought into the process. Now, there are some downsides to this. In terms of desktop applications, the newer ones are not currently out for Mac OS. So if you're a Windows user, there's no problem there, but Mac OS users are going to suffer a little bit. Mobile apps are widely available across both platforms, so that's not too much of an issue. Now, in using most of these, they do accomplish their purpose really well. These aren't the kind of apps that are just released and then have very mixed compatibility and a lot of bugs to them. Overall, I really had no complaints with them. So if you're looking for another way to make your actual integration and introduction to a NAS much more smooth, you're going to want to check out their desktop options as well as their mobile options and see what works best for your lifestyle. So let's return to the subject of the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port at the back of the NAS. Now with Asustor, they have begun a really large push for accessibility for 2.5 gigabit Ethernet across their devices and making sure you can have it on your own devices via something like very cost-effective accessories. Now first off, we do have the AS1102.5 G2. This is a USB Ethernet adapter that is utilized to turn your laptop or PC that doesn't have something like a PCIe card that's compatible with 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. So when you are directly connecting your device to the NAS, you can do this without problem. Now, as a secondary device, they have also released a 5-port switch. Specifically, the switch installer from Asustor will allow you to integrate all of your devices at that 2.5 gigabit Ethernet speed. So rather than just having that speed when directly connecting your NAS to your device via the Ethernet adapter, you can certainly control your download speeds on your NAS at that higher 2.5 gigabit connection. So you're going to get 2.5 times that performance potentially. Now in this case I say potentially because I need to talk specifically about my performance results based off my RAID 1 setup with the 2 Seagate Iron Wolf hard drive disks. Now, in terms of beginning testing, I did something very simple. I did file transfers via two methods. First off, I mapped network drives and transferred files to them individually and got above gigabit Ethernet transfer rates. Similarly, I connected to the internal IP address of the NAS under network on Windows and got above gigabit Ethernet speeds. But in both cases, they were not to the advertised max rates that you could get with 2.5 gigabit Ethernet for the NAS. Specifically, Asustor mentions a 215 megabyte a second read and a 270 megabyte per second write. Now, I'm going to talk specifically about why it did not achieve this, but under the lens of the second performance test results. So let's move on to talking about the second performance test results. Now, for this, I use fairly standard applications. I use Blackmagic disk speed test, and I use AGA system test to test the drive's read and write speeds. Now, in these cases, the results were less impressive. Now, the question is, why are they not achieving towards the suggested ideal results by Asustor? Now, if you do go to the Drivestor 2 page and look at the specific performance results for it, you're going to notice they were not using the 3.5-inch hard drive disk for their lab tests. Instead, they are using Iron Wolf SSD drives, and these boast higher transfer rates. So if you are dealing with two hard drive disks for a NAS grade device, what you're going to need is a RAID 0 configuration versus a RAID 1. Otherwise, you're not going to get close in terms of performance results. Now, in terms of other tests, as you might expect, if you are transferring and writing to otherwise an encrypted folder, you're going to get slower access speeds. So again, keep that in mind. For the question of whether you should purchase the Drivestor 2, a lot of it's going to boil down to your actual performance expectations. This is an entry-level 2-bay NAS unit, so if you do keep your expectations in check, it's not too much of an issue, but there are still some things to keep in mind. First off, the 1 gigabyte of RAM is not upgradable, so I did notice things like my memory usage going in the upwards of 50 to 80% depending on what I was doing. So you're going to keep in mind that you may want something like the Drivestor 2 Pro if you're looking for an easy RAM upgrade without too much considerable cost added. Secondly, there's not things like SSD catching. So again, if you're looking for more performance and more advanced features, things like more RAID level options, you're not going to get it specifically with this unit. But if you're that type of enthusiast, you may have been looking at other NAS units already. Overall, what we do have with this little NAS that can is something that provides a variety of options and is a very good cost-effective, beginner-friendly option. So if you're wanting to get into a NAS and you're eventually looking at upgrading, the Drivestor 2 is a good go-to when you're getting started out. A big thanks as always for everyone watching. If you have any questions about the Drivestor 2, feel free to leave them below and mention any of your home network experiences in upgrading from standard gigabit Ethernet. Now, I also want to thank Asustor providing the Ethernet USB adapter as well as the Drivestor 2 testing unit, as well as to Seagate for providing the Iron Wolf drives for testing. Now, if you would like to read a more in-depth written review, be sure to head over to makeuseof.com. And if you want to see more content like this, feel free to leave a like and subscribe.